A little over a week ago and extended the invitation to speak today. And of course, I'm always appreciative of the opportunity to share some thoughts and perspectives, but I had to decide pretty quickly what exactly is it I'm going to share, because there's lots of stuff I've been reading and thinking about, but out of that, what is the right and perfect message that I need and that we collectively need in this moment? And so, like any good Unity student, I took that question into the silence, and the answer that came to me was kindergarten. Kindergarten. What's up with that? Well, I reflected that life presents us with a series of lessons to be learned, and that these lessons seem to build on those that go before in a cascading manner, getting ever more complex and challenging and intricate. And yet, we never really outgrow the need to work on and master those earliest, most basic lessons. And so I think what Spirit was trying to tell me was to devote some focus to going back and revisiting and working on some of these basic themes. And so I had to kind of get back in that frame of mind. And as you can see, among the transitions I was negotiating at this particular stage of my evolution was a dental transition. And so what you see here is that gap, what Helen talks about, the hallway between my baby dentition and my adult dentition. So this is a hallway snapshot here. So I kind of got back in the feel of what it was like for these lessons to be fresh and vibrant, and sort of was able to channel that and get back into the feel. But I needed some content to it. Feeling's one thing, but little content sometimes helps. So I thought of a book on my shelf that I hadn't visited in a while by a guy named Robert Fulghum with the title, All I Ever Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. So I went back and consulted that book to kind of give me a summary of what I was working on back as a 6-year-old. And Fulghum has a kind of almost poetic summary of the kindergarten curriculum, I'll call it here. So to do justice to his writing, I'm going to read it once through as it is, and then I'm going to come around and circle back to a few of them to highlight and add some color to them. So here's the list. Share everything. Play fair. Don't hit people. Put things back where you found them. Clean up your own mess. Don't take things that aren't yours. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. Wash your hands before you eat. Flush. Warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. Live a balanced life. Learn some and think some and draw and paint and sing and dance and play and work every day some. Take a nap every afternoon. When you go out into the world, watch out for traffic, hold hands, and stick together. Be aware of wonder. Remember the little seed in the styrofoam cup. The roots go down and the plant goes up, and nobody really knows how or why, but we are all like that. Goldfish and hamsters and white mice and even the little seed in the styrofoam cup, they all die. So do we. And then remember the Dick and Jane books and the first word you learned, the biggest word of all, look. So let's go back and dwell on a few of these. Warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. There's no doubt some good truth to that when taken at a literal level, but perhaps there's a broader metaphysical meaning at work there too. Warm cookies and milk could stand for any number of simple pleasures that we oftentimes don't allow ourselves time to savor because we get too busy in our work in the world. So I think the lesson there is to take time to savor those milk and cookies, whatever form they take for us. Take a nap every afternoon. Again, there's some literal wisdom there, not a bad practice, but metaphorically, the nap can stand for whatever it is that we do to step back from the busyness of doing work in the world, to allow ourselves to simply be present and be. Watch out for traffic, hold hands, and stick together. How appropriate is that in the context of what we confront in our world news and our evening news, as well as in the context of our spiritual community here at Unity of Dallas? Be aware of the danger, but stick together, hold hands, and confront it together. Be aware of wonder. How easy it is to be jaded and complacent while we're pursuing our worldly activities at a frenetic pace and lose sight of how wonderful it is to simply be. And finally, look. I think there's a reason Fulgham left that one to last. This is the lesson that for me is the hardest to apply consistently. The distractions of our reminiscences about the past and our plans for the future too easily get in the way of simply being in the present moment. Fulgham challenges us to be aware and conscious of what arises in the current moment. So this was a good start toward the kindergarten lesson, but yet I thought something a little more literary, a little more metaphorical and metaphysical might be in order. And so I also thought of an old childhood friend, A.A. Milne, who is the author of the Winnie-the-Pooh stories, which are found in actually 2 volumes. Winnie-the-Pooh was published first, and then The House at Pooh Corner was published a couple years later. And these stories were originally created as bedtime stories by Milne for his son, Christopher Robin, who happened to be in this transition from the nursery world to the school and learning world at this time, roughly the ages between 4 and 6. And the characters in the story gave voice literally to the stuffed animals in Christopher Robin's nursery. With the exception of 2, Owl and Rabbit were actually modeled on real animals in the woods of the country place where the Milnes went to on weekends to enjoy nature. Now in Unity, we use a technique that we call metaphysical Bible interpretation, where when we look at a story from the Bible, we look at it not only in the context of being in a place long ago and far away, but also in the context of each character being an aspect of our own consciousness that we're looking at here and now and dealing with happening to us here and now. But this technique of metaphysical interpretation is not confined to the Bible. It applies equally to all literature. And so I'd like to apply those techniques of metaphysical interpretation to the characters that Milne presents us in Winnie-the-Pooh. The lead character, of course, is Winnie-the-Pooh himself, who is actually an amalgamation of Christopher Robin's teddy bear, named after Teddy Roosevelt, who had rescued a bear from the wild and made the stuffed bear animal popular in the years preceding this, and an actual live bear in the London Zoo named Winnie, who had been brought there from Canada, captured in the wild, and was a favorite of the kids at the London Zoo. And Christopher Robin himself named his bear Winnie-the-Pooh after Winnie in the zoo. And then somehow there was this swan at the zoo named Pooh that got mixed in too. You know, it's a 4-year-old imagination here, but that's how Winnie-the-Pooh got named. And what's distinctive first about the character of Winnie-the-Pooh is his love for honey. To Pooh, that is his warm cookies and milk, is honey. That's the form it takes. In fact, the first thing Pooh says to himself when he wakes up in the morning is, "What's for breakfast?" So it's about the anticipation. It's about the savoring, as Fulgham brings out in his book, the savoring of those good things in life, but also the confident expectancy, the looking forward, the anticipation. In fact, when Pooh is asked the question what he likes best, he gives this response. "Well," said Pooh, "what I like best." And then he had to stop and think. Because although eating honey was a very good thing to do, there was a moment just before you began to eat it which was better than when you were. But he didn't know what it was called. So although these stories present eating honey as a very good thing, Pooh is constantly getting himself in trouble by his single-minded pursuit of his love of honey. He gets up in a balloon in the trees, and the bees sting him, and he can't get down, and he gets the honey jar stuck on his head, and all these things come from his love for honey. So what the stories suggest is that although there's nothing wrong with our love for honey or whatever stands for honey in our life, that we can learn to moderate our pursuit of that good and avoid the calamities that result from excess. So this is Milne's way of presenting to his son and to us the virtue of moderation. But Milne has two other characters that demonstrate the virtues of moderation and balance, and those are the pair of Kanga and Roo, who always appear together. Now, Roo is a baby kangaroo, full of insatiable curiosity and excitement, and always likes to get out of the pouch, the comfort of the pouch, and explore around. But Roo's curiosity sometimes needs to be moderated by his mother Kanga's loving concern for his safety. There's the watch out for the traffic part from Fulgham's book. Is sometimes there is traffic out there that we need to be careful of. And Kanga is the character that sort of balances this curiosity with caution and concern. But it is a question of balance, because we don't want Kanga to get so overprotective that Roo stays in the pouch, because after all, how can you explore and learn, if you're protected all the time in the pouch? So these two characters give us that balance. As far as thinking goes, Pooh is identified as a bear of very little brain. After all, he's got sawdust stuffed in his head. What do you expect? But what we find in the stories is that by focusing his simple and uncluttered mind in the problems at hand, Pooh inevitably comes up with exactly the right idea, exactly the right solution to solve the problems that his friends have. For example, the animals experience a flood. Pooh comes up with the idea of using Christopher Robin's umbrella as a boat so that they can float over the flood and rescue the other animals. When Eeyore has been bounced by Tigger, we'll get to Tigger later, into the river and is floating in the river, it's Pooh who comes up with the idea of dropping a rock to create a wave to wash Eeyore over to the shore. So Pooh has this innate inner wisdom that we talk about in unity, this ability to become open and receptive to the right and perfect divine idea at the moment. And that's what's being presented to us by Milne in this story. The contrast to Pooh's simple, naive wisdom are, on the one hand, Rabbit. Rabbit is the planner and organizer. He always has a plan of action and is always organizing and directing the efforts of others. The problem is, sometimes when that plan isn't working, Rabbit is slow to abandon the plan and to change course. He's very stubborn and committed to his action, and gets so absorbed in his plan that he's overreactive and distracted by the presence of others. So when his friends drop by for a visit, he's gruff, he's busy, whatever he's working on, doesn't have time to simply be with his fellow animals. On the other hand, Owl is completely absorbed not in the future plans as Rabbit is, but the past. Al is an aloof, abstract thinker, very refined taste, loves to offer advice to his animal friends, whether they've asked for it or not, and likes to talk about the past exploits of his ancestors, Uncle so-and-so, and the time that this and that, but is not so focused on the moment at hand or solving the problem as he is sort of lost in all of the abstract thinking about the definitions and the past and so forth. So we have on the one hand Rabbit, who is absorbed in the future at the expense of appreciating the present, and Al, who is absorbed in the past at the expense of appreciating the present. And so Pooh navigates in between these two, and by being simply present and receptive to the perfect idea, is able to be the problem solver. And in fact, in the context here, these stories are presented to Christopher Robin at that time when he is ready to enter the formal education process, to get these ideas in his head. And so Christopher Robin is going to have to learn how to cultivate an owl nature. He's going to have to learn how to think abstractly. He's going to have to cultivate a rabbit nature. He's going to have to learn how to plan and organize. But Milne's hope is that in doing so, Pooh will never leave his inner Pooh nature behind. And while inhabiting owl and rabbit, that he will remain Pooh and remain open to that naive and open wonder. Just as Pooh is held out as the example of the inner child's ability to tap into that innate wisdom, Piglet is held out as that same child's ability to bravely confront his or her fears. Because Piglet is presented as a very small animal, and as a very small animal is overwhelmed by the immensity of all the other actors in the environment. And even in imagination, Piglet is able to conjure up these very scary things that cause Piglet to be in fear. But at the same time, Piglet is very cheerful and resilient. In fact, the first thing that Piglet says to himself upon awakening in the morning is, "I wonder what exciting is going to happen today." So there's that looking forward to the anticipation again, a little different anticipation than Pooh's anticipation, but anticipation of action. If Pooh is kind of a model for a being character, Piglet is a model for a doing or an acting character. And in fact, by using that anticipation to bravely confront the fears, Piglet emerges as the hero. It's Piglet who is hoisted up on a rope to the top of Al's house when it's blown over by the wind to go out through the letter slot to send for help to Christopher Robin. So Piglet is honored as the hero, notwithstanding the fact that he's naturally fearful as a very small animal. Piglet's reaction to fear is contrasted by two characters also. First of all, Tigger. Tigger is entirely fearless, full of exuberant energy that the other characters call his bounce, but he's unfocused, boastful, and unrealistically overconfident about his abilities. Tiggers can do anything, right? Except they really can't, and can't always follow through. So, Tigger is always annoying the other animals with his bounce, even knocking them into the river and so forth. And to the point where Rabbit, who else, comes up with a plan to unbounce Tigger. And so this also involves fear. This is all about fear. Rabbit's plan is that if the other animals can take Tigger into the woods and get him lost where he doesn't know where he is, then he will become so fearful that that'll completely overwhelm his bounce and he'll be just a meek, mild animal. Well, the plan backfires on them because Tigger doesn't get lost, but all the rest of them do, and Pigger has to go find them and lead them back. And in the process, the other animals come to appreciate that without the bounce, Tigger just isn't Tigger. In other words, he can't be his unique self. And so the way to manifest the highest and best Tigger is not to change the nature of who Tigger is, but to work with those natural talents and to develop them, much as Pooh is encouraged to moderate his love for honey. Work with what's natural and bring it out rather than try to change the nature of who we are. The other contrast on the other side is Eeyore, who is so fearful of failure and disappointment that he's withdrawn into this sullen and morose isolation and in his gloomy place where he looks at everything in the worst possible light. But yet underneath that sense of gloominess, Eeyore has a general concern for his fellow animals and a genuine need to be appreciated, which is illustrated in the story of Eeyore's birthday. On Eeyore's birthday, none of the other animals recognize that it's Eeyore's birthday until he not so subtly drops a hint or two. And then Pooh and Piglet realize that the right thing to do is to honor Eeyore on his birthday, so they quickly go about trying to select a gift. And Pooh selects as his gift a jar of honey, because after all, that's what he likes the best. But because Pooh hasn't quite learned that lesson of moderation yet, he eats all the honey on the way to taking it to Eeyore. So when he arrives, you have an empty pot. Piglet has just had a party thrown for him because he emerged as the hero, and so he's got these balloons around, and he says, I'll take Eeyore a balloon for his birthday. But Piglet is inattentive and falls and bursts the balloon on the way. So when he arrives, he has only the shards of a burst balloon. And Eeyore is presented with the empty pot and the burst balloon. But Eeyore is the happiest he's ever been in his life. Why? Not because of the presents themselves, but because of the intent behind them, that somebody, his real need is to be honored and appreciated. And in this kind of way, he does feel honored and appreciated. And so the story ends with Eeyore taking the burst balloon, putting it in the empty pot, taking it out again, putting it in, as happy as he can be. But it's really not the pot and the balloon, it's the thought behind it. The character that ties all these others together, though, is Christopher Robin himself. And this is a little bit of a postmodern twist, because Christopher Robin is not only the listener to these stories, but a character within the stories, which must have blown little Christopher Robin's mind. It blows mine. But applying our metaphysical techniques, we can see that Christopher Robin stands for our ruling consciousness, what Charles Fillmore would call our Christ nature, because this is the character in the stories who's able to give perspective and comfort to all the others, that all the others look up to for guidance. And much as Charles Fillmore presented Christ and our 12 powers, represented by the disciples, as those forces within us that we use and harness to achieve our purposes, that Christopher Robin seems to be that perfect inner child who has to inhabit and manage these personality complexes of owl, rabbit, Tigger, Eeyore, but not get lost in them. Is it any coincidence that Christopher Robin starts with the Christ in the first of it? You know, maybe unconscious on Milne's part, but I find it pretty interesting that Christopher Robin starts with Christ, because I believe this is a metaphysical representation of the perfect Christ nature that each child has, and that Milne certainly saw in his son Christopher Robin and wanted Christopher Robin to appreciate as a listener in the story that that's who he was. He was this perfect expression who's able to manage and overrule all these other voices, all these other personality complexes that are prone to show up. Also, to Christopher Robin, two examples to be emulated are held out, Pooh and Piglet. Pooh is held out as an example to be emulated for his ability to stay present in the moment and to be open to the influx of divine ideas. Piglet is held out for his ability to bravely confront his fears and to lean forward and to be expectant and confident about what's ahead. So, reflecting back on what little David learned long ago from these stories, I came up with 6 takeaways. First of all, it's okay and even good to enjoy whatever stands for you as your honey, but do it in moderation. Second, Piglet's lesson, lean into your fears rather than backing away from them. Third, the lessons of Owl and Rabbit, don't let your plans for the future or ruminations about the past distract you from being aware of what is present in the current moment. In other words, from simply looking, back to Fulgham's emphasis on look. 4, stay confidently expectant about the good in store for you, whether in the form of Pooh's question, what's for breakfast, or Piglet's question, I wonder what's going to happen exciting today. And by the way, Pooh observes that these questions amount to the same thing. Number 5, remain open and receptive to the influx of the right and perfect idea to solve the problem at hand without needing to strain or overthink the situation. And 6th and lastly, among the busyness of all your activities, allow some time each day to do nothing and simply be. I forgot to point out that Christopher Robin's favorite thing to do was doing nothing. But going into the world of kindergarten and education, he was threatened by losing that ability, getting absorbed into the activities. But it's clearly Milne's hope that he will not ever completely lose that ability to simply do nothing, to simply do nothing and simply be. So if I could just manage to actually apply these lessons on a consistent basis, I would be truly deserving of my kindergarten diploma. But somehow they gave it to me anyway. I feel like I cheated them a little bit. I've got the diploma, but I still am working on the lessons. So I'd like to take that now into a meditation with instructions designed to induce that state of consciousness present in a bear of very little brain.